I've got a fairly basic synth sound loaded in based on a saw wave, and it's in the first slot, and we're going to look at editing the instruments in these next few videos. Now we get to the edit panel with this icon over here. Now the first thing we need to do is select which element we want to edit. And an element is kind of like a group of samples or zones. So we select here. Now this is a simple instrument, so there's only one element, but an example of a multi-element instrument might be something like a piano with release samples, where all the release samples are one element and the note-on samples are another. Or maybe a string sound where there's pizzicato strings on one element and staccato sounds on another element. So we can toggle between the element view and the zone view here. Now here we get a list of all the zones that comprise this element. In this case, since there's only one element in this instrument. And the zones in Sample Tank 4 contain one or more samples that share a note range and a velocity range. So what does that mean exactly? All right, we have an element, and that's a complete voice with its own filter and envelope and LFO and pitch and volume and pan settings. And each element contains multiple zones, and a zone can contain one note or it can contain multiple notes. For example, when we have round robin samples, what that means is if you have multiple samples assigned to the same pitch and velocity range, so that if you're hitting repeated notes over and over of that same pitch and same velocity range, they'll trigger alternate samples, so it's not the same sample all the time. So that's an example of where you might have multiple samples assigned to one zone. So in this case, we're going to edit the element, which is the higher level in the instrument, rather than burrowing down to the individual zones. And we toggle with this button. So we're editing the element, and round robin is not particularly relevant in this instrument. And we have two different types of edit panels, it should be noted. One for Sample Tank 4 instruments, which is what we're looking at now. And there's a legacy one to handle Sample Tank 3 instruments that looks a little bit different because they don't get imported in the same way. So here's this simple synth sound. And I want to start by looking at these basic envelope settings. So here we switch between the amp, pitch, and different synth engine envelope parameters. So let's start with the amp envelope. We can adjust basic level and pan and velocity, which are very self-explanatory. Velocity offset. Now this interacts with the amp envelope, and the amp envelope is used to edit the trajectory of the level of the sound over time. So this adjusts, for example, the overall level of the sound, but here we can slow the attack of the sound if I want it to fade in. So you can see the trajectory with this little momentary dot. So it fades in until it reaches full volume or full amplitude. And then it's held for a specific amount of time before it decays and then rests at a lower volume. So the decay is an amount of time, as is the hold, and then the sustain is the level that it's remaining at. So now it's staying at the sustain, and when I take my finger off the note, it's released based on this release value over here. So let's have a slower attack in, then a quicker decay, and then a long release, so we can really follow the trajectory. It fade up, hold, drop down to this level, and then when I release my finger from the note, drop down at that rate. Okay, taking my finger off. And when it gets at the bottom, that's when the note is completely silent. We can also drag the nodes here. So that's basic amp envelope stuff. Now we can further edit the pitch envelope here. So here we can adjust the basic tuning of the note, and that's just a raw offset of the pitch. For example, here I'm hitting an A. So you can automate it to get pitch scoops like that. And I'm going to command click just to snap it back. And we set the pitch bend range over here in semitones and the pitch down range. So that's up and that's down. And then there's a pitch envelope. So here in this menu, we can drop down and get a pitch envelope here. And this will, again, offset the amount of the pitch. And then this, the property of how that pitch is arrived at over time. So maybe I'm going to go up a little bit like that. But I want to have it fade up to that. So I'm going to adjust the attack time. So here it goes, kind of scoops up in pitch. Or I can have it scoop down. A little pitch up. Maybe not quite as fast an attack. And then, again, I can have it sustain at a lower level. Maybe I'm going to have it sustain at the actual root pitch that I've held it at. And I'll have it decay much more quickly. And I won't hold it as long. I'll decay it even quicker. Slower attack. Maybe a faster decay. So that's the pitch envelope. Again, the principal amount is here, and then over time, how it's arrived at is determined here. Now we have a third pane here where we can choose the type of synthesis engine. And we have resample, which is the most commonly used one, or we have resynth. And here it's got to recalculate the waveform, and I'm just going to speed this up a bit. And here we can affect the formants and the harmonics. But the more common kind, as I mentioned, is resample. So those are basic amp envelope, which interacts with this, pitch envelope, which interacts with this, and then the synth engine type parameters. We'll continue with more in the next video.